Okay, hello everyone. That was a bit scary for me on this end. I don't know what happened, but I was having a lot of issues with the YouTube tech on going live. So I think I learned a couple things. If anyone misses this live stream because you had turned on notifications for the other live stream that I had scheduled, I'm so sorry, but I had to create a whole new live stream. Because apparently doing it from my phone was not the appropriate way to do it. So I think I figured it out. I think I learned my lesson. Please be patient with me. We are just getting started. Okay, so welcome to episode number 2 of the Kayla Burke Show. What I'd like to talk about with you today a little bit is some of the aesthetic psyops that are going on right now in the mainstream, culturally, with celebrities and a lot on social media, since that is where most people spend the majority of their time. And so things like skinny talk, etc., we're going to talk about a little bit today. Now, I am going to try to share my screen here and we will see what happens. But I wanted to show you guys, hopefully this is showing up for you. I wanted to show you guys this article from the New York Post, harmful TikTok trend fueling new wave of dangerous diet culture. This was from June earlier of this year. And this is kind of highlighting the peak of what has been going on TikTok specifically, but it's also made its way over into some of the corners of Twitter or X, and of course, Instagram, not to mention Reddit subculture. So it's really been a breeding ground for the skinny talk trend is kind of a breeding ground of what I would say is a resurgence of old dieting culture. When I say old, I mean, I'm making myself old too. Old dieting culture from maybe, 20 years ago or so. When I was in high school, I was graduating early. I was going into the fashion modeling scene, the runway modeling scene. And this was the kind of stuff that was going on. I did not have the TikTok, the Instagram, etc., that we do now, but the conversation was very much thin inspiration, right? Like the heroin chic type look in the early 2000s and the 90s is really when that took root, right, in the psyche across America's women, the Western women. And so now we're seeing this resurgence online, on the social media platforms. And what I want to talk about today a little bit is not to just double down on their messaging and give them a platform or spread their message, but I want to draw attention to it and call it out in some of the really subversive, sort of what I call aesthetic psyop ways that it's being done subversively, right? Subconsciously through the algorithmic machine of social media, which is so much stronger than anything that we've ever seen before. Okay. So skinny talk specifically is referring to, they call it a corner of the internet. But I think it's becoming way more dominant than what they knew back in June when they wrote this. Creators are openly documenting their weight loss journeys, posting what I eat in a day videos featuring alarmingly low calorie counts, and sharing body checks, which means videos where people are weighing and measuring themselves on camera and sharing those results. And so some of these content creators are boasting about gaslighting themselves into being skinny. And this was a big thing back when I was struggling with my own disordered eating patterns that led into anorexia, eating disorder. Gaslighting yourself into being skinny you're highlighting, or you're admitting, it's astonishing to me that they're using this terminology, because you're admitting to narcissistically abusing yourself, and how that is somehow worthwhile. That is somehow like, everyone should do this. Everyone should narcissistically abuse themselves into being skinny. And being skinny is worth suffering the narcissistic abuse of gaslighting yourself. So this all stems from a spirit of fear. Um, Even if the person consuming this type of content is already, fit or skinny or pretty according to widely accepted, and narrow, very, culturally appropriated, kind of sick, disordered standards of what is considered attractive, beauty standards, they are still participating in these corners of the internet and these, trends like skinny talk, um, by participating and accepting this sort of ritualization of narcissistic abuse over themselves to be a part of the tribe. All right. And that's part of what's going on here too with our minds, and the way that social media affects our minds, especially as women. We're created very much to not be lone wolves. We're created for relationship. And so when you search, I don't recommend you do this, but when you search skinny talk on places like TikTok, you're going to get trigger warnings, but also prompts telling you that you're not alone and you can seek help if you're struggling with body image, food, or exercise. That's all great. That's kind of like a regulation, trigger that they have set up on the platforms. But the reality is that the amount of "you're not alone" prompts, and "you can find help if you're struggling with body image or food or exercise," those sorts of prompts, the ratio of that to the amount of content that is being put out in these corners of the social media, platforms like Skinny Talk and TikTok, um, the ratio is way off, way off. And people who are in these corners, like deep into these cult, narcissistically abusive, gaslighting themselves sorts of rabbit holes, um, which I can speak on because I was there for a while when I was modeling, you don't think you need help. So self, you're not objective. You're not objectively seeing yourself in the mirror. You're not objectively looking at what you're doing to your body long term. And so the rabbit hole, the sheer amount of quantity of content that is being put out in these areas of the social media network around these topics, that is encouraging the tribal hive mindset of belonging to these groups, to this cult of skinny talk, is so much stronger because it is capitalizing on multiple things going on in, our human psyches. I mean, I speak to women specifically, but men are not immune to this, especially younger men and younger boys. So the algorithm is going to serve up more of that content that you consume. And I talk about this all the time with my membership community in Flex Your Feminine. We have to be super diligent and vigilant in discerning what we are giving our attention to online, because the algorithm is studying you. It is conducting, creating a war manual on how to keep you on its platform longer, because the longer that it can keep your attention, the better it profits at the end of the day. There's a better chance that you're going to click on an ad. There's a better chance that you're going to buy something like from TikTok Shop, etc. So its whole goal is not to keep you healthy or show you healthy things. Its goal is to hijack your hive mind set, the mind that wants to be involved with something worthwhile, that gives you a sense of belonging and a sense of community. And a lot of people have sadly found that in the corner of the world online called skinny talk. And there's many variations of this. Okay. So I'm not like trying to pick on skinny talk specifically, but people in the corner of the world of skinny talk has this trend has gained such a huge following and it's capitalizing that following. It's building that following on the backs of a lot of the most psychologically vulnerable, the youngest of our communities. Okay. So some influencers are being banned for promoting really, really unhealthy habits. And so, I'm not a big fan of censorship, but, if you are promoting self harm, which is what eating disorders fall into the category of, social media being like a town square for conversations to be had is fantastic. But the darker side of this is that if we start allowing things like abuse and smut content and um, self-harm content, like, these different sorts of things, that's like dark web category, right? Like that's very, very demonic. That's not what these platforms are supposed to be for, especially if you are allowing children on these platforms, which many do. Sometimes there are parental controls involved, but that really doesn't go very far on these platforms in my experience. So the trend has amassed such a huge following, specifically skinny talk, that is built on those who are already most at risk because they're resonating with this gaslighting, narcissistic messaging around their bodies, around food, around exercise. Right? It's the extreme end of the spectrum for these conversations, and it's really not unlike what I was experiencing with the hashtag Finspiration, hashtag Fitspiration back 15 years ago. Okay. Even 20 years ago when I was starting to model. No, internet was not what it is now. Social media was not what it is now, but it still existed. And that was still part of my story. So seeing it have the power and the momentum that it does now really terrifies me for the generations behind me who are consuming this. And parents, moms, dads, if you have your children, if your children have their own cell phones and they have accounts on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook that you don't monitor, or if you don't monitor their screen time and know exactly what they're looking at, these sorts of messages are so easily put in front of them to their very impressionable psyches and can start to take root and can start to um, hijack their minds and the way that they see themselves and their bodies and food and nourishment at a very, very young, impressionable age. Most of this is happening, a lot of this is happening to girls and boys who are going through puberty. And that is like, we've all been there. We know how awkward and uncomfortable it is anyway. And you're not really loving what your body is going through and what you're experiencing and what you're seeing in the mirror, right? So they're already in a struggle season, an in between season, if they're going through puberty. And the last thing that they need is to be inundated with messages from the demonic algorithm of marketing things like skinny talk and all of these hacks and trends that are going on in that realm, right? So I'm going to cancel out that screen share there. There's a lot of other articles that, and quite frankly, really good insight from what's it called? It's here in my notes. It's from the Renfrew Center, excuse me, talking about different articles and conversations going on social media and just in different social circles at large, where it's talking about like heroin chic is back from the 90s, or bye bye booty. Heroin chic is here as the new goal for women's bodies specifically. And the Renfrew Center specifically is an eating disorder focused organization. And so I do really like that they were warning about promoting the heroin chic aesthetic and how dangerous it is, because it does also, alongside of the physical ramifications of not feeding yourself well or treating yourself well through proper and appropriate amounts of exercise. The heroin chic mind virus, specifically, that psyop, which is what Skinny Talk is leveraging, it glamorizes the drug culture aesthetic along with the extreme thinness. Okay, there's a reason why it was called heroin chic in my day. That is glamorizing drug culture, and that's why are we putting that in front of our women and in front of our children? We have to ask, who benefits off of our young girls getting into cycles of disordered eating and damaging their bodies at a, like a prepubescent or even during puberty level, before they've fully developed into their fertile years, and then it postpones their fertility, or it damages their future fertility. And then for women in their 20s and 30s as well, these messages coming through the social media channels and portals, it's programming, it's uploading into your subconscious and your psyche what the world expects of you, what the matrix expects of you. And then in order for you to belong, your subconscious mind is going to try to fit those expectations. Your reticular activating system of your mind is going to bend over backwards to find ways to prove that you belong there, if that's where you're identifying, right? And spending your attention. And there's another layer to this conversation as well, because unlike what I went through 15, 20 years ago with the heroin chic sort of, coming off of the heroin chic in the early 2000s look and trend. This phenomenon, this psyop of skinny talk and heroin chic making a resurgence, is very much, excuse me, layered in with the current what's the word? Pharmacological, is that the right word? Trend of Ozempic and different variations of the Ozempic, drugs for losing a bunch of weight. Okay. And so, excuse me, the overarching truth here that we need to be really warned about and cautious about as we are consuming content is that the ultra thinness state for women specifically is being glamorized again. And this is very clearly to me, because I did live through it, like I said, 1.5, 2 decades ago. This is very clearly to me a modern rebirth of that prior psyop. And we know that culture runs in trends and patterns. Most of us who, have been awake for a few years understand that language. But the Ozempic layer, or the GLP-1 conversation, adding to this time around, this time the pendulum is swinging in the pattern rhythm, that Overton window is not shifting back. So the drugs, we're not just talking about literally heroin chic with those sorts of drugs, but we're also talking about the heroin chic look, the skinny talk trend being platformed alongside of the GLP-1s and those things being pushed for people. I am not here to like bash GLP-1s or promote them. That's not what I'm here to do. There are certain peptides and complexes that I think, based off of the research that I've done so far, are absolutely phenomenal and can be super helpful. I don't personally work with GLP-1s in my communities, but that doesn't mean that I don't think there are specific nuanced places for them to be incorporated. However, what we are seeing promoted via celebrities and even, moderate to small time influencers in these content spaces on social media it is not the nuanced conversation at large. It's the platforming of drug-induced skinniness at the expense of your health. Drug, what I'm referencing there, drug being either GLP-1s of some sort or combination, and or the heroin chic look is coming back, and they're not being shy about calling it heroin chic or calling it Ozempic heroin chic. Okay. And the language is not empty. What we call things, how we refer to things, how we use our tongues are very, very important and powerful. So if we're going to align our goals with, oh, I want to be heroin chic again, really think about what you're saying over your body and over your own psyche. Okay. Alongside of this movement that is very concerning to me on a psychological warfare level, we're also seeing a continuation and evolution of what's been going on for a while in the wellness and fitness dieting spaces around clean eating and detoxing and shifting the conversation um, away from the data around nutrition and how it works in your body for what purpose, and towards food as like some sort of claim to morality and identity. Okay. And this is extremely dangerous because it transforms food culture into fear-based food culture, moralizing diet culture. If you're on a keto diet, you're a better person than you are if you're on a Mediterranean diet or whatever, right? If you are eating the standard American diet, you are a sheep that's asleep, and you're just a loser of a person because you've never been taught any differently, and making it all about um, ego and pride. And it really is a spirit of pride there because we are propping up um, certain subcultures within the fitness community, right? Like if you're a carnivore, you're just a great person versus if you're, and it's just so amazing to me that we've gotten to this place. It's like content creators are framing bad foods and toxins, and even inflammation and stuff like that in terms of morality so that they can capitalize on, again, the fear and the desire of us as human beings um, to be accepted for who we are, right? And if we're not a good person because we eat carbs, but we want to fit into the keto cult, who suddenly we have to stop eating carbs in order to be accepted into the tribe. And in that tribe, we find belonging, we find security, we find safety to whatever extent, right? I saw this in the fitness space. Um, it's been slowly, the Overton window has been shifting in the nutrition space, but I saw this specifically in the fitness space when CrossFit was becoming super, super popular. It still is popular, and I'm not here to bash CrossFit, but the philosophy around CrossFit became very much a moral high ground. If you weren't a CrossFitter, if you weren't training in the local, popular CrossFit box, and if you weren't part of the cult of CrossFit, you just like weren't a cool person. Like, you can't sit with us. It was that vibe. Same thing in the bodybuilding community. When I was a part of bodybuilding and I was doing my bikini shows and I was on national stages and doing really well, right? It was like, if you didn't place well in shows, if you were a part of that coach's team instead of that coach's team, very cliquey, right? Very tribe, hive-minded, capitalizing on that for profit and promotion. You weren't a good competitor. You weren't even a good person. You can't sit with us, right? And I'm not saying area of the fitness industry was like that, or that every person consciously thought that way. But the spiritual energy, the component around these things became very obvious to me rather quickly, and was just super icky, right? Super icky. And there's always a bit of that in the marketing space. If any of you have been um, in marketing departments or run campaigns for different products or companies or brands, etc., if you're a branding specialist, like you know better than most that there's a huge psychological component to trying to get people to identify with your brand, with your mission, with your product. And the more they identify themselves with you, your product, your mission, whatever, the better outcome is going to be for the sales and the profit margins and retention of customers or clients in gyms, for example, members in gyms. Um, so you need them to buy in at a visceral level. And what is more visceral than identity language? That's what's happening here. Like the enemy, Satan, is not oblivious to these mechanisms of the marketing matrix. He designed it. He is the prince of the air, right? The prince of lies, the prince of the air. So a lot of what we see in marketing is completely micromanaged by the spirit of deceit and the prince of the airwaves, the prince of the air. All right. And so it's just important to be conscious of this as I'm seeing the Overton window shifting again, specifically around food and body image, and eating disorders seem to be on the rise, which is very concerning. There's this urgency for me to call those of you who resonate with my messaging and the way that I speak into these issues, to call you to have more vigilance in the way that you interact in these conversations online and on social media. Because the reality is that our social sphere today online is so drastically different from when I was struggling with an eating disorder as a runway model in New York and didn't have the same level of social media messaging and social sphere influence that 16-year-old girls today do online. So there's just this radicalization of thinness as a subculture. And what's dangerous with that is that it is very pro Anna. And for those of you who don't know what Anna means, it's a way of hiding the anorexia conversation online. So a lot of times you will see people naming their accounts Anna something. And it's not necessarily that that is their name. It's that they are a pro anorexia account. And there's a lot of communities that are named this way. There's a lot of echo chambers available for young girls and boys to find themselves falling down into, down the rabbit hole. And so there was a study. Let's see if I can bring this one up. There was a study. Yes, I can. Okay, cool. I'll get better at this sharing, you guys, I promise. Radicalized by thinness. The model of radicalization to understand pro-anorexia communities on Twitter specifically. And this is a good piece of research for you guys. If you're interested, I will have this in the show notes for you. But basically what it's talking about is there's a rise in eating disorders. This study was done in 2023 from May to August, I believe. And there was a rise in eating disorders then, post COVID, not really unsurprisingly. And it's gotten worse now. I mean, now we're in 2025, right? So it hasn't reversed. And the anorexic condition specifically, but eating disorders as a whole, they lead to extremely serious health complications. So this is not something that is just like, oh, anorexia is just a trend. No, the spirit of anorexia, the source of the anorexic messaging is coming from a spirit of scarcity and control, manipulation, and trying to take God's daughters off of the playing field in the realm of health and longevity and mental alertness and sharpness, which leads to spiritual alertness and sharpness and being able to discern truth from lies, as well as take the next generation off the board, because anorexia and other eating disorders, one of the ramifications can definitely be loss of fertility. This is why I resigned from my modeling career. My doctor told me that if I continued down this path, I could very likely be looking at damaging my fertility long term, and I wouldn't be able to have kids, or it would be extremely difficult for me to have kids. And at that point, I hadn't had my menstrual cycle in a year. And so this is not uncommon. Okay. I'm not some sort of special case when we're talking about anorexia and other eating disorders. The physical ramifications, the health complications outside of the mental component, is not something to be taken lightly. Okay. So if you're finding yourself getting sucked into the Reddit forum subculture, or the corners of Twitter and the corners of TikTok, etc., that are talking about pro-Ana or skinny talk or things of this nature, I caution you to really, really turn on your discernment and be aware that the spiritual warfare side of this is trying to radicalize thinness. And through your ability to identify with that being what you want at all cost. So in order for you to be a part of that tribe, in order for you to be radicalized by thinness, you will be laying at the altar of a false god your ability to think clearly, your ability to be metabolically healthy, and eventually you will also be sacrificing your ability to have children and bring forth the next generation. Another study found that a lot of Reddit and diet and fitness forums that were very female oriented forums, where thinness was definitely the goal of the conversations and the questions being asked, these conversations had a much more negative coding to them, a much more negative emotional expression, a lot more negativity being expressed about their bodies, a lot more dissatisfaction with their own bodies, a hyperfixation on what they are dissatisfied and discontent with about their physical appearances, not about how they're feeling. Again, a lot of times they're gaslighting themselves and glorifying things like passing out, things like being so hungry that you can't think about anything else. I mean, this is very, very serious, okay? And it starts small. I'm not saying that any of you necessarily listening to me right now can really relate to a lot of that, because hopefully you are not in the throes of an eating disorder, living that as your reality. But this sort of pendulum swing, this Overton window shifting, starts very small. It can start with things like intermittent fasting, where you train yourself to starve for the majority of the day instead of honoring your circadian and cyclical, your circadian rhythm and your cyclical cortisol curve, right? It trains you to find what's the word I'm looking for? not identity. It trains you to find value, like to find your value, to find your worth in how little you can eat compared to someone else, and then how many bones you can see protruding, right? Like it's dark. It's dark. It's the glorification of death. It is the Antichrist. It's anti-life, spirit of the Antichrist. All right. It's glorification of starvation and making it this fashion statement. It's not a glorification of health and rooting you in the identity of how you were designed and created as a woman or as a man. Okay. So there's patterns here. There's patterns here. And so a couple red flags, like tactics, psychological warfare tactics and themes that I want you guys to watch for. Nostalgic revival. So things like heroin chic, throwback to the 90s. The 90s were the last great decade. When it's framed in that way, it's going to evoke familiarity for those of us who did live through that. I mean, I was raised in the 90s. So, I was born in 89. I'm barely an 80s baby. I remember the 90s very well. And then in the early 2000s, I was coming into my own puberty and then started modeling. So this sort of language theme tactic is meant to evoke comfort and legitimize whatever message they're trying to promote. So it's a psychological lever that they are going to pull, and you need to be aware of that. So examples of this is going to be, like I said, the heroin chic look is back type of headlines or type of clips from celebrities. But they're even leaning away from celebrities now, because post 2025, post 2020, people don't trust celebrities the way that they used to, right? The stars have fallen type of a vibe. So they're going into the social media sphere, and the algorithms are promoting the micro influencers, okay? Not even necessarily the big influencers, but there's small, medium, and large doing this. And then we've got another tactic or theme, the medical, pharmacological kind of gloss put over everything. And this is to mask the extreme dieting as clinical, as trustworthy, because we're supposed to trust the science, trust the medicine, trust pharma, right? And I think that there is a lot of good caution already in the community as a whole, in the collective as a whole, against the medical industry and pharma. So that's great. But I've seen a lot, unfortunately, that the same people who, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, during the height of 2020 stuff, I have to be careful about what words I use here. I'm going to get labeled by YouTube and my videos won't show. But the height of 2020 and the height of the, pokey. Okay. Those same people that were very much questioning and very much digging in to find the truth about those things and not just trusting it outright are lining up and trying to get to the front of the line for things like Ozempic and not asking questions. And this is even being pushed through kind of the terms like maintenance doses of Ozempic, or we're just going to microdose Ozempic. It's just another way to biohack you, right? And biohacking is really, really big. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are missing the forest for the trees when it comes to biohacking. You're jumping to things like drugs, right? And not really taking responsibility for the basics that you can do to really, really help yourself before seeing if something clinical is actually really necessary or going to be beneficial to you at all, right? So a lot of discernment there needs to be personally exercised. And then there's another tactic. There's a lot of like ambiguity and soft language being used around this so that it makes it sort of this, your subconscious, you can consciously sort of have plausible deniability around falling into these traps, right? So things like clean eating, things like detox marketing, things like um, I'm just doing a reset. I just need a reset, right? These sorts of buzzwords, you'll notice I never use. I never use in my marketing. I don't use any of these things for a reason, because I'm not going to skate on hold on to the coattails of the enemy's playbook. The enemy's playbook is the exact inversion of God's kingdom and his playbook. Why in the world would I try to use these sorts of soft language terms to trick anyone into my programs when my programs are not clean eating? My programs are not detoxes. My programs are not resets. My programs are biologically true, period. And we can talk about that another time. Okay. So this sort of soft language where it's sort of ambiguous and it sounds really great, and it gives you plausible deniability of having done anything too harsh, right? That's what all that means. It's still not letting you off the hook, but it makes you psychologically feel like you have plausible deniability. I was just doing a detox. I'm just doing a reset, right? It's the same snake. You're getting bit by the same snake. It's just maybe it's a smaller snake. Okay. And then there's another tactic, algorithmic viral triggers. This is huge. So when you feed the algorithm, which is its own monster, you're going to get more of what you are spending attention on. So men, if you are feeding your attention and interacting with images of scantily clad girls dancing on TikTok and Instagram, the algorithm is going to feed you more of that. You have to be vigilant and block every account that shows you something like that. Mute them. Tell Instagram you are not interested in it, because as a man, they know that you're a man. And if you're within a certain age bracket, the algorithm, even if you never look at that sort of stuff and you have trained your algorithm, every once in a while, the algorithm is going to show you something tempting just to see if the enemy can get a foothold, because the algorithm is a spiritual portal. Okay. If you interact with it in a certain way and do not guard your gates, it is going to bring you more clickbait, more before and after images, for example. Like I'm not limiting this conversation to porn. In the fitness industry, it's going to give you more skinny talk. If you engage with skinny talk conversations online, it's going to give you more ridiculous before and after marketing gimmicks. It's going to give you more of the soft language that I just talked about, or more of the nostalgic revival language, more of the medical, clinical conversations around Ozempic, GLP-1s, instead of fundamentally changing your lifestyle and taking responsibility, right? So these are always going to be linked to, the algorithmic viral triggers are also always going to be linked to very easy to believe things, because the enemy knows what you want to believe. So if you're seeing things like, I lost 40 pounds in 3 weeks, or 40 pounds in 6 weeks, right? Like, these are what they know you want to think is possible. And if you are willing to pay the price, like taking drugs or being, embarking on an eating disorder journey, stuff like that, well, if you're willing to pay the price, you might be able to sit with us, right? That's the underlying tone. And then, of course, we have the tactic of moral framing that I talked about. It's like there's implicit judgment there, good versus bad, both with food and bodies and even exercise, like I talked about. So if you're eating this, you're lazy. If you are working out this way, that's disciplined. you're a good person, right? All of this, if you're seeing that sort of language, if you're getting stuck with that sort of algorithm, tell the algorithm not to show you that sort of stuff. Keep scrolling. Don't like it, and don't leave negative comments either, because it doesn't matter to the algorithm whether you leave a comment positively or negatively. If you engage with it at all, if you send it to someone and say, oh my gosh, this is what Kayla was talking about. Look at this. If you send it to someone and say, this is what Kayla was talking about, this is the lie, you're telling the algorithm you want to see more lies. So you have to disengage. You have to disengage entirely. Click on the little hamburger icon or whatever it is on your app and your phone, what you're seeing the content on, and say, not interested. If you're following someone that's spreading that sort of information, unfollow them. You have to guard your gates, curate your feed, and control your algorithm. Be hyper vigilant with the algorithm. Because like I said about the guys and the half naked girls, even if you're really good about this, it's going to tempt you. It's going to sneak something in there every once in a while and try to get you to eat the forbidden fruit. Okay. The normalization of extreme numbers. So things like, oh, I fasted for 50 days. I eat 800 calories a day, skip lunch forever, skip breakfast forever, that kind of stuff. These are, this is the use of shocking language and extreme numbers to shift your baseline of what you'll tolerate. So if you're already tolerating like the 1200 calorie club, the 800 calorie club doesn't seem that ridiculous, right? Or the 1000 calorie club doesn't seem that ridiculous. And it's just going to keep going down, 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 down. The more you shift the baseline, the more your Overton window shifts of what you're going to tolerate. The less shocking things become, the more depraved things become. All right. We get desensitized to this. And then there's a bit of a community echo chamber. So if you are tolerating this sort of algorithmic presentation of information and conversations into your atmosphere, it's going to reinforce compliance, because you're not seeing in those spaces, you're not going to necessarily see the other side of the coin of someone stepping into those spaces and speaking truth. And if you do, they're probably getting ganged up on. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've engaged with a keto guru's post in the comment section and gotten massively ganged up on and had threats messaged to me. And I know friends and peers who have had this happen as well, because it's all a big cult. And if you threaten their dogma, if you threaten their guru, their little g god, you are the enemy, and they will come after you full force. It's just straight up dark. Okay. So be very careful about private groups as well that you are joining into. There's a lot that goes on in private groups, that private communities and membership spaces, Facebook groups, stuff like that. They get away with a lot more dark, a lot more peer shaming, a lot more gaslighting, etc. there than they even do on the public platforms. And they get away with a lot on the public platforms. So it's scary once you go behind closed doors. And so there's some red flags there. So whenever, you see some of those tactics, some of those themes coming forward in the content that you're consuming, and I'm talking a lot about social media today, but this definitely applies to more of the mainstream content. Like, what are you seeing on YouTube ads? What are you seeing come forward for you on the TV shows and the movies that you're watching? How often are they showing you the mom that runs out the door in the morning after feeding her kids and all she has is a cup of coffee in her hand? These are very subliminal messages, right? And then she comes home at the end of the day and the kids ordered pizza and she sits down with a glass of wine after a long, hard day at work, and she's not even touching the pizza. These, again, subliminal messages of the cult, okay, of not taking care of yourself. It's not, Yeah, it's like it's out in the open. It's plain to see on a lot of these shows and stuff like that, but it's not like they're telling you, "Oh, look, this is how you are skinny. This is why Kim Kardashian is skinny, or this is why this actress in your favorite sitcom show is skinny." It's just subliminal. It's always subliminal. So you have to know your own mind and be vigilant. And so I'll just finish with saying I think it's resurging now, as I mentioned, like the pendulum has swung and the Overton window has shifted. And a few forces seem to be at play right now. There's a much higher visibility of weight loss drugs, right? The public discussion and acceptance in the collective around GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, etc. It makes rapid weight loss much more visible and for many people accessible. Okay. And so some influencers are adopting, I used Ozempic, so I got skinny type narratives, which is blending the medical clinical conversation with the aesthetic psyop. Okay. And so some critics are calling this the Ozempic heroin chic, which I talked about earlier, and there's a lot of warning there. Secondly, the algorithmic incentives or the attention economy that I was talking about, extreme content will engage more people. That's all the algorithm is designed to do, is engage more people and get more people to stay on the platforms longer. If you boil it down and you take the spiritual component out of the conversation, that is what the algorithm is doing. Once you layer in the spiritual component, you've got the shock and awe value, right? The platform is going to reward higher engagement, give broader reach to these super clickbaity, shock and awe type pieces of content, things that are getting a lot of triggered reactions in the comment sections, right? Getting a lot of discourse and debate going, yada, yada, yada. And so the spiritual side of that conversation is division and distraction. That's what they're doing with you. Okay. It's not about spreading truth. Truth doesn't spread quickly because truth doesn't really repeat itself. Whereas the lies repeat themselves and just sprint through the internet. I mean, it just spreads like wildfire, right? The truth is calm. The truth is confident. The truth doesn't scream and the truth doesn't run, okay? But the lies do. So anything that looks really popular and really, really easily, broadly, widely accepted and unquestioned, you should automatically have your discernment red flags popping up on that. Sometimes something that is true does go a little bit viral. I mean, a lot of like what we saw with Charlie Kirk was going viral and he was speaking a lot of truth, right? But at the same time, the algorithm is going to capitalize on divisiveness, debate, distraction, and discord. Okay. Thirdly, the cyclical nature of the aesthetic trends. And there's a backlash here to the body positivity saturation that we've tolerated and are not tolerating anymore, like the Big is Beautiful campaigns and stuff like that. For years now, we have been told big is beautiful, fake surgically induced curves are the goal, inclusivity, et cetera, right? That kind of messaging. And so the pendulum is now swinging back the other way. And so I don't agree that all of that messaging that we were being inundated with over the last 10 years or so, 8 years, was necessarily the right answer. I do think that it led to some good conversations being had for sure. But the glorification of the other extreme of obesity, of the lack of knowledge of health markers, biomarkers that are present in that population, was not healthy either. Just like it is not healthy to have it swinging back the other way to heroin chic, because being skinny is not a guarantee that you are healthy. Quite the opposite. Okay. Being hyper skinny, having disordered eating habits, having a disordered view of your own body and a bad relationship with exercise, that is just as dangerous as the obesity conversation. Okay. Cultural anxiety and austerity narratives. We live in pretty uncertain times, as I'm sure you all have noticed, kind of economically, politically, like that's not what this channel is all about. But when we live in a state of cultural anxiety around certain things like that on the macro level, micro level control narratives like how you can discipline your body, how you can micromanage your diet, etc. Diet and fitness become domains of controlling the chaos, which gives people a false sense of security and safety. And so that's playing into this as well right now with the resurgence of this restrictive, hyperfixated, controlling, micromanaging attention to food and fitness. And then, of course, finally, the peer influence, the micro influencers, the reinforcement, the echo chambers, right? Like I said, it's not so much the big celebrity campaigns right now, although we are seeing some celebrities definitely participating in the GLP-1, losing of weight and conversations there. But these psyops on the majority are really propagating through more niche content creators and micro influencers, smaller community threads and corners of the interwebs, and makes them harder to spot. It makes them harder to regulate. It makes them harder to protect your children from, because there's a lot going on the mainstream platforms of Instagram scrolling and Twitter scrolling and TikTok scrolling. But if you start getting lost in the weeds of Reddit forums or other platforms like that, and your kids start doing that, and private communities, etc., that starts to get even darker really quickly. Okay. So that's pretty much all I've got to say on that today. I mean, there's a bit of an ongoing conversation here. I think that given my mission, which is much more holistic, women's wellness, faith-led, hormonally aligned, cyclical, and very biologically accurate truth-telling and strategies to implement for your health and your aesthetic goals. We need to be vigilant with our language, right? We need to use counter narratives really proactively. And that is something that I really, really intend to continue doing, of course. I'm going to continue leveraging very aspirational language, very biblically grounded messaging, instead of the scarcity or the deprivation or the narratives that you're seeing in the mainstream. Okay, I've been doing that for a long time. That's not going to go anywhere. I'm also going to continue to educate you and kind of inoculate you as my audience. We're going to be talking about myths versus facts in upcoming segments and episodes. We'll highlight, kind of like today, media literacy for diet and fitness messaging to make sure that you are well equipped with the armor and the weaponry that you need in your arsenal to be able to recognize these things when they are in front of you on these platforms. And the more you can understand the enemy's tactics, the less vulnerable you are. So that's what I'm here to try to help you gain awareness on. And we will continue to have our messaging anchored in science and nuance, as well as bridging the conversation of fitness and nutrition into the faith sphere. Okay, very, very much. This is a space where your faith and biblical truth lead. I cannot separate it. As I said last week, I think it was, Charlie used politics as his bridge to share the message of Jesus Christ and the truth of the gospel. That is also what I'm doing, but my bridge is fitness and nutrition for women. Okay. So with this, we're going to be monitoring micro trends, signaling, detecting, these false signals. I'm going to curate our community norms really, really strongly. So you'll see that the content that I share here, I'm not going to be sharing things that are very clickbaity. I'm not going to be sharing things that are necessarily going to go viral. I'm going to be doing some reactions to very popular content and giving you my 2 cents of what the spirit is, what the Holy Spirit is telling me, what my spirit is checked on, and why this sort of content is a problem, so that I can alert you to the smoke in the room. Okay. And we can get out, we can put the fire out for ourselves. All right. And so with that, I hope that this was enlightening for those of you who are watching. I hope that this conversation will continue for you in your own circles, and you can share this, subscribe so that you can get notifications for our future episodes, and bear with me as I get better and better at sharing my screen and operating all of the tech involved.